Hello, and welcome to One Week Critiques, the interview series. Today we are joined with poet Jenny Molberg. You're the author of two books, Marvels of the Invisible, which came out in 2017 on Tupelo Press, and Refusal, which came out earlier this year on LSU Press. You're the co-editor on a book that takes into account the life and work of Adelaide Crapsey, director of Pleiades Press, co-editor of the journal Pleiades, and associate professor in the English and Philosophy department at the University of Central Missouri. So, I mean, that's only a few things. What else should our viewers know about your life and art?
I'm like, that is correct. What if I was just like, no, I'm not. You have the wrong person. What else do you need to know? I don't know. I was thinking about like how difficult this year has been, and how it's important for us to stay at home, but how much I love my job. I've been thinking a lot about that lately, and I really miss seeing my students in person. And I miss being able to go to conferences and talk about the journal and talk about the books we publish. And I'm very grateful for online opportunities like this. And conferences that are going online. It's still not the same, but it's like, at least we get to see our friends. And I think it's cool that we get to encounter people maybe who we wouldn't see otherwise because we're separated by distances. But because I guess of the difficulty of this year, although there are glimmers of hope, I haven't been writing as much. I've been hearing a lot of writers say that. It seems strange that I don't have anywhere to go, but somehow there's more work. I guess that's transitioning online. But anyway, I've been writing a little bit. I got to go to this really cool writer's residency in Arkansas that's doing a great job with social distancing. And I did some work there, but I'm working on a new book of poems. I think it's close to being done. We'll see.
Nice. Well, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. We are going to look at a first draft and then final draft of a poem from your book, Refusal. And that poem is called Epistle from the Henares River. And I will bring it up on the screen so our viewers can see it and then ask you to read it. Okay, whenever you are ready.
This is an interesting experience. I don't think I've ever shared a first draft of anything. And do you have people say that in this series? Like, oh God, this is embarrassing.
Yeah, I mean, people are, it's hard to bring out that first draft, right? Because, you're just trying to, write down a feeling or an experience or something. And, as we're going to talk about maybe today, this is a lot different than the final draft of the poem. Mm-hmm. And so I do think it's hard, one, for some people to find first drafts,
yeah,
and two, to want to share them because, right, it shows you maybe at even a more vulnerable position than when you're trying to publish something, right?
Right, for sure. I think that's true. And it's something that I've never read out loud either, so.
Well, it's going to be an experience for everyone.
Okay, I'll read it. All right. I could stuff my ears full of cotton. I could live underwater. I could blare white noise from a speaker on my back and still he would scream. It wakes me at nights. It never seems to end. The sound grows louder until the only other sound is my heart in my ears like a fever. Once in the birthplace of Cervantes, I had an apartment. The walls were white and the stairs were marble, and to get into the building you had to unlock two heavy metal gates. The neighbors and I hung our laundry in the laddered courtyard, and on warm days, we were a spring-soft tower of Babel, and no one could hear a thing. Because I knew he was waiting for me, I took the long way home from class, down the path along the Henares River, and listened to the storks tapping with their beaks, the clucks growing louder in their orange throats, then the whoosh of their black-tipped wings as they landed in their giant nests. The city had built metal bowls on the roofs for the nests because the weight of domesticity can cave a roof. We used to talk about having children then. On nights I wasn't being punished, though this began to happen less and less. He didn't seem to care about the storks and the way the city seemed to be built for them. They even guarded the old castle that was closed to visitors. He never even saw the river and the blue jacaranda that made me a carpet of my favorite color, where I listened to a podcast about Robert Lowell unraveling, calling my mom, who was just waking up in Texas, telling her so many lies I could barely keep them straight. This is what happens when your relationship is poison. You become all the things that you weren't. A liar, a spooked horse, a deer in the woods always hiding. Back at the apartment, everything became his until I had to knock on the living room door for permission to enter like a child. If I forgot, I had to go back out and try again. Do I need to mention that this was for my job, an apartment I had earned alone? But this is really about my mother, hero of my adult life. Because when I came home that day, I was wearing headphones and she was there listening because I was afraid. Her voice there directing me like we were CIA agents. What is that? We were CIA agents. And the man who would hurt me was wearing a boyfriend mask. She could hear everything he was saying to me, every name he was calling me. This is one of the most intimate moments my mother and I have shared since I was a baby. Since she held me in her lap to show me pictures or stroked my sweaty forehead in a fever. At 32 years old, I was more of a child than I had been when her alcoholism made me into an adult. And because she was 5,000 miles away, all she could do was listen. All she could do was speak to me in her soothing voice that pushed through a thin white wire tucked inside my shirt. So when he started to put, I say her, I think his, when he started to put his hands on me, she knew not to yell, and her voice did not rise in pitch, the way you know not to raise your voice in pitch when you want your horse to slow down, to keep it steady and low and go down in town. I have no idea what I meant by that. Do you know how to call the police? She said, her voice low and steady as the sound of a river flowing through. Lock the door, she said. Make sure he takes all his things, she said. And when he ripped the earbud from my ear, my only last connection to safety was severed and her disembodied voice clattered to the floor. But she was there again when he was gone, and she was there every day until I left Spain, a voice inside the little white pods in my ears. And when I returned to Texas, I lay down on her couch for 2 days, my head in her lap like a child. I would not trust another person again for a very long time. In a fever, I dream my one good dream. The sky is raining petals. Everyone is speaking Spanish. I walk to the cathedral and giant birds are nesting overhead. I am alone. Home is on a thin wire, only an ocean away.
Thank you. So, as you said, you've never read that before. How did that feel?
It was an interesting experience. I mean, it's like a lot. I guess when I looked at it as like a prose block, I didn't realize how much was there. And then I think it is kind of interesting. I mean, though, like some of it's embarrassing, like the CIA agents moment. It's kind of interesting to notice like the little nuggets I plucked out to like make into a poem.
Right. I mean, yeah, you say the CIA agents is embarrassing, but it's kind of funny, like in a fun way, you know. I mean,
that's how my brain works. I'm always convinced that I'm like a secret agent.
Yeah, you've got your earbud in, right? So you're ready. Out of curiosity, why did you choose this particular poem to discuss today?
Well, one, because I drafted the poem, I believe I was on my phone when I drafted this poem, so it was like typed up. I think I'm pretty sure I was on a train when I wrote this, kind of like getting out of the town I was living in Spain and going to Madrid, I think. So it was more accessible, I guess. Usually I handwrite all my first drafts and they're such a mess that many times I can't even read them. Like if I'm still in the moment, I'll type it up, but if I return back to it later, it's like completely illegible. So
no, that makes sense. I have, probably the same thing, notebooks, right, where you can't read anything, but yeah, maybe something was there.
Yeah, I thought this poem was interesting too, like as a draft, because it traveled really far and it took me a really long time to write versus some of the other poems in the book, I think like came out more fully formed.
Right, so this one, starts as a prose block, maybe to do with how you were writing it, right? And it covers like a long process or a long like event in detail. And then it moves, and we'll see this later when you read the final version of the poem. It moves to 12 couplets. So I was curious about your generative process in general. As you say, some poems will come out, pretty close to fully formed. This one happened not to. Do you generally write as much as you can down at once, and then try to pare that down into some sort of distillation, or how do you normally go about that?
Yeah, that question like really makes me think of like my life as a poet, because I think I used to write in this way that like a line would come to me, or I would think I'm going to write a poem about that, and it would be like maybe I edited in my mind, or it would be like pared down. And if I would bring a poem like that to workshop, there would maybe be this moment that I would dread where people would say like, give us more. And then I didn't have access to like the feeling of the poem in the moment. And so I think I kind of learned over time to just like push your thoughts as far as possible and get it all on paper, because that way you have like material to work with. And I think I started thinking of poems more as like material things versus like an idea or like a capturing of one feeling.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There is that, tendency, right, in workshops for people to ask for more. I wonder, what do you think about that being a byproduct of we really like this versus we don't understand this?
I think it often has to do with we don't understand this or a lack of clarity. Sometimes there's like a mystery that is working in the poem, and so you can kind of take it with a grain of salt when someone says I want more, as long as like the mystery is clear, I think. But yeah, sometimes maybe it's, I've been thinking about this in my workshops with my students, because that's been a comment I've heard a lot this semester, is like, we want more. And so I've been encouraging them to write like more poems coming at the same topic or experience, like from different angles, rather than trying to go back into the poem and like add in, or like try like different versions of the poem, like with different approaches. Which is something I've kind of taught myself to do as well, because going back into a poem that you felt like was done is really difficult to do, and sometimes like doesn't work.
Well, this poem definitely changed dramatically,
yeah.
Right? Because the final poem is a formal poem, right? It's actually a ghazal. So how do you move from this prose block to a ghazal?
So, okay, I was thinking when there were so many drafts of this poem, but like from this verse to like the final, and I think I kept overworking it, and then I kept also like not understanding what the poem was about. And then I noticed like how much I was talking about sound, like the voice in the headphones, like the loud noises of the abusive person, the storks, the horses, the river. And so I thought like, why don't I try a form? What captures this kind of experience of like a repeated cycle really well? Oh, a ghazal. And so then I think I just tried it. And then the more I realized like, oh, this really fits, because it actually mirrors the cycle of abuse. Where there's that like the words, the language might change, but you always end at the same end word. And then like what I love about the ghazal is that it leaps, so like from couplet to couplet you can make these big leaps, but still you keep coming back to the same result. And so I think that when I finally landed on the form is when I finally thought like, okay, this is a poem, because I think I was ready to abandon it for a while because it wasn't about, I don't know, it was about a lot, I guess. And I was having trouble sort of balancing it all.
So speaking about things being about something, right, or too much, how do you think about poetry versus, say, if this were a nonfiction piece, right? Like, what is the difference in your mind between having a poem be about one thing or multiple things versus like an essay being about one thing or multiple things? Like, how does that work in your mind?
I think that's an interesting question because like for this book, the second section was an essay for a long time. And then I turned it into a poem because that's what I always do. No, but like, I think that both essay writing and poetry are able to hold a lot and distill things and be lyrical about that. And I love essays that are able to do that. But I think that poems can really like distill a moment or a feeling. And also you can address it in many different ways. And I think, and not that essays can't do this, but I think when you're able to like inhabit different voices in poetry, maybe like several different poems that are surrounding an experience, but using persona or perspective to like, or like a certain image or a certain metaphor to like deal with it in different ways. I think that you can really distill experience. And I think you can also enact empathy through poetry in this way that is really special because of that like ability to shift perspectives.
Yeah, I almost think you're getting to do both in the book because, right, you have several epistolary poems throughout the work, right? And so you're getting to write like it's a letter, but in a poetic format. Who do you see as the recipients of these letters? I know you say in the back of the book that they're addressed to certain people, and some of them very clearly are marked as such. But were they written for them in the first place, or someone else?
Well, the epistolary poem started with a conversation that I had with my friend Caitlin Cowan, who was a poet, and we were just talking, and we came up, like, I said something like, oh, I wish there were a hospital for this kind of experience. And she said, that's a poem, write that down. And so I dedicated that first one to her, and I decided like that the perspective of that hospital was going to be that like I, or the speaker of the poem, was in that hospital, and like the only way to explain it would be to like issue out a letter. And then I got on a roll, and so I thought like, okay, where would I be in this poem? What would this hospital look like, and who would I want to write to from that? Like who would understand this hospital the best? And then for this particular poem, which is just a couple of epistolary poems that aren't from like a hospital, I definitely want to thank my friend F. Douglas Brown, the poet, because he helped me write this poem a lot. But I ended up not putting an address on this poem because I realized it was a letter to myself. And I think that the form, lends itself to like that being illuminating. I mean, when I use my own name, like the ghazal traditionally does, it's like in my mother's voice. But then I realized, this is one of the last epistles I wrote. I think it was the last epistle I wrote for the book. So it seemed fitting to like finally confront yourself.
Yeah. And yet it comes early in the book, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe we'll talk about the arc a little bit more in a little while. Okay. But this particular poem, right, it kind of positions the speaker as a startled horse, and the speaker's mother attempting to calm that horse. I love poems about animals personally.
Me too.
And many poets like to write about animals. So why do you think that is? And what do you think animals can help tell us about ourselves?
I think this is such a good question. And I think that like the first thing that I think about in terms of this question is that like we're so convinced that there is a distinction between humans and animals. I was looking over like your drafts of these questions earlier, and I saw this question and I was like, I should revisit this because I wrote my dissertation, or like the preface to my dissertation, on this subject. like, what's the connection between humans and animals? Like, why do we use them as metaphors? Like, that seems kind of gross. And so I wrote it down. I asked this question that was, it says, if we are animal in nature, how certain are we of boundaries that exist between the human self and animal other? And conversely, how can the creative human draw a bridge across a river made of language? So that really got me thinking about, like, you know, that animals and humans are not, we just speak different languages. And so, like, maybe the experience is languageless, and maybe, like, the only way to relate the experience is to, like, look through the lens of an animal that, like, speaks a different kind of language. And I think, like, I spent my childhood around horses, so I have, like, a deep connection with the way that we talk to horses, and now I feel like I speak to my dog, and she teaches me things, and I think we can, like, if we look at the world in that way, that, like, I don't know, we're connected, we're not different, we just don't speak the same, that, I don't know, realms of understanding could open up.
Definitely, yeah. I told you before we started talking in this interview that I started a job as a delivery driver. One of the things I do during my routes is kind of note all of the different animals I see.
Yeah.
And there was one experience I had where I went to this house that was kind of in the country, and it was, you know, a hilly place with lots of trees, so basically a timber. And there was a fawn by itself, and, you know, no mother, no father around. And I drove a vehicle close by it and parked and got out, and it went a little ways away, but it didn't leave. And then I deliver a package, and I come back, and the fawn's, like, right there, like, looking at me. And I don't know, it was like you're talking about, this very strange wordless gap between us, right? That we're looking at each other, and I started talking to the fawn, and the fawn still didn't leave, and it never left. I left because I had these things to do, but, like, I would have stayed there.
Yeah.
A long time, probably. I don't know. It's a strange thing.
I totally get that. And then I think, like, it like lets us stop and use our imagination, like children, but we should be like that, you know, like, to think of that fawn being like, what's Amazon?
Right.
Man. Like, or like when we were at Swanee, I remember, like, going at night to and, like, taking apples from breakfast, and, like, just, like, standing out by the fence, and the horses would just, like, know that I was there and come, and I would feed them apples. And I think that those connections are really important. And I don't know, it makes me think of that James Wright poem about a blessing, about the horses.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Speaking of poems, let's take a look at your final version of this poem from Refusal. I'll bring it up here. All right, whenever you're ready.
I'm just finding it in my book real quick. Okay. Epistle from the Henares River. Still I can hear it. In Spain, the sound of a man hating me so loud. He invented new sounds, tearing through our apartment, conducting his own anger. Storks made throat sounds like brass knuckles against bone. I startled through rooms, a spooked horse. This was the sound of me becoming what I wasn't. Scared thing, liar. My mother's voice on the phone, the only sound I could take. I was afraid to say what was happening to me. Her plain sounds 5,000 miles gone. Me listening. The headphone cord roped around my neck, sounding its split-rained hymns in my ears. Call the police. This is how you call the police in Spain. 112. Sounds of hooves in her voice. He began to put his hands on me, and she made a little sound, trying to listen. Then, no sound. This is how you command a horse. sounds calm, low, woe, woe. So when I was pinned and he ripped the headphones from my ears, the sound of my mother's voice clattered against the hardwood, a child falling down a well, a sound that haunted my dreams for years. Jenny, Jenny, an Atlantic away, my mother's futile sounds.
Thank you. Yeah, you can definitely hear the difference between that poem and the first poem, both in its formal qualities, but also in your comfortableness with reading it and, you know, the evocation of the feelings within that poem.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when I think of your poetry, you know, I think a lot of your poems are very personal poems. And I also think about your mother, particularly after reading the first draft in this and reading Refusal, and, you know, as being possibly the most important person in your life. How do you feel like you're able to write so openly and skillfully about this subject matter? Because, you know, I find it really difficult. So, you know, what allows you to do that? And also, how has your mother made such a huge impact on you?
Thank you. That's such a good question. It's kind of a beautiful question. So I think you're right. My mother is really important to me. I think that writing these poems in many ways saved my life. I think I was doing a lot of self-realization through the poems, and I was able to say what I couldn't say, and being silenced was like a really big part of this experience. And so I think I kind of like took a fake it till you make it approach to bravery. Like I wasn't feeling brave in my real life. And I wrote a lot of these poems and I submitted them to journals, and then I withdrew them because I was afraid of what would happen. And finally I just was like, fuck it. And sent them out, and because I thought maybe they would reach someone. And I'm really glad I did, because I think, you know, I've heard from some people who have shared this similar experience, and it's really connected us and it's created friendships. Writing this book actually made me find my best friend, which is really cool. And in terms of writing about my mom, that was hard. But I showed her the poems that I had written about her and her story, and asked her if it was okay if I published them. And, you know, it was kind of a difficult conversation, but she just said, it's your story too. And I think that was like really generous. And so I think it in some ways like was healing to kind of like put this out there, write it down, put it out there, say what I felt like I couldn't say for so long. And yeah, but my mom is incredible and one of my best friends.
Well, and the story gets to be ongoing too, right? Like there's more happier parts to the story, right, after you've gotten this down.
Yeah, that's so true. Like things come out of the pain, you know, like not just creating something out of pain, which I think is like important and beautiful. But yeah, the connections and the conversations that we create out of art. I've really been learning that and thinking about that a lot lately.
Definitely. So thinking about the book, there are several famous figures in the book, some that repeatedly show up, some that do not. I'm thinking here of like Ophelia, the Demogorgon, Emily Post, Penelope. And so, right, the book follows a type of arc of this abusive relationship, right? And it happens over time, but also over place, right? There's travel involved, particularly as we see in this poem here. How did all of these characters come to inhabit this particular book? And how are you able to weave their narratives into your narrative?
I think that someone was just telling me the other day that she's doing like a whole semester long workshop on persona, and I became very jealous because I wanted to take that class, but I was also like, that's a really good idea. I think that persona allows us to, so it's kind of like a metaphorical mask, right? You know, and it allows us to say what we feel we can't say, or it allows us to like articulate into a silence that we feel in our personal lives. And I think that persona really allowed me to kind of explore things I wasn't willing to say, but also like different perspectives I wasn't willing to empathize with, like the Demogorgon. Also, I was playing a lot of D&D.
As
Watching,
one does.
yeah, as one does. I got together with a group of friends like on a weekly basis for like pre-COVID and wore silly hats, and I was dungeon master. And then I got super into Stranger Things. And that Demogorgon just like seemed like such a rich metaphor, because especially because the Demogorgon is led by the Mind Flayer. So like it's this source of evil that's like a minion. It's not of its own, like it doesn't act on its own agency. That made me think a lot about like toxic masculinity in our culture. So like the Mind Flayer is toxic masculinity. And so like how can I empathize with the Demogorgon? I think that actually helped me like heal in some ways. And Ophelia I see as a figure of like victimization because of that toxic masculinity, but also like I wanted to give her agency that she doesn't really have in the play, in Hamlet. So blah blah blah. I feel like I'm going off track.
Well, she comes back to slay the Demogorgon in the book, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think the third to the end poem, right? And so that's like one of the things that you're able to do. Like Ophelia gets this new life and does something with it, you know, particularly with it. And I think that's really interesting. You know, someone once told me I had some poems that were just poems about me, and then I had some poems that I wrote, so like ostensibly were about me, but brought in a painter, right? And they said, okay, you know, these poems with the painter have cultural cachet, whereas these particular poems, they don't really add a whole lot. What are your thoughts on that in general? Like, I don't think it's as simple as like you bring in someone famous or something and like the poem all of a sudden becomes this other thing. But like, I don't know, that's a question that I've, you know, contemplated for a long time and don't know that I know the answer to.
Do you think that it's possible that like in your, who is the painter?
A very obscure painter.
Oh. So in your case, not someone famous.
Right. Only famous in Poland.
Oh, cool.
I mean,
that's awesome.
I think it's Zdzisław Beksiński. And so a Polish painter, but, you know, he painted more kitsch, I think, than like what you would consider high art, so to speak.
Cool.
I don't know, like I wasn't.
Do you identify with him?
In a certain respect, yeah. Like his whole idea was he's painting his nightmares. Like that's his whole thing, is like, I'm painting my nightmares. And I guess the thing identified with most was the difference that he has in scale, where like there would be a figure of some sort, and then there would be smaller figures, you know, and the big figure would be like a building or something, and then the smaller figures would be like going in and out of the building, or, you know, different types of wastelands that you might see in a sci-fi movie or something. I don't know. That spoke to me, as well as the color. I really like the color that he used. And outside of that, I was, you know, kind of practicing just ekphrastic work and seeing like, you know, if I don't take a master, I can't mess up too bad, right? Like, you know, no one's going to get mad that I wrote this ekphrastic piece about, you know, Guernica, and now I have to deal with this. But if no one's into Beksiński, well, I don't have, you know, naysayers. Maybe that's like part of the thing where like we're scared, you know, people are going to say something about the work, right? And somehow we have to get over that.
Yeah. Do you think that like the poems about the painter allowed you to say something like more honest, or?
Yeah, in a certain respect, I think I was able to not have to worry so much about getting it right, but just
Mm-hmm.
saying the thing.
Mm,
You know, like
yeah.
that idea of, this is exactly what happened in this way versus like, this is what I'm seeing or feeling or whatever.
Yeah.
So in that respect, yeah, I think so.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, they're still on the chopping block right now. We'll see what happens.
Oh no, I want to read them.
Well, there's a few of them out there, so we'll see. Maybe you'll see some.
I hope so.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Maybe you could give us like a short preview of what you think your next book is going to be, since you're kind of working on it right now, without giving away too much.
Okay. Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. This is really fun. I have some poems that have come out recently from the new manuscript. They're really about I don't know what that means, but they're addressing, confronting, whatever, the justice system in this country, and how broken it is. And I'm speaking from my own experience in some of the poems, and in others I'm speaking about our culture's true crime obsession, which I include myself in. And I have some ekphrastic poems that are like in response to this amazing forensic scientist, Frances Glessner Lee, who made these, like, she would hate if I called them dollhouses. So like they were miniatures, but they were crime scenes that were used to teach like cops at Harvard to learn how to read a crime scene. So I think she's super fascinating. So it's like all kind of about like criminal justice system in this country, and like its failures. And I don't know, hopefully in the real world we'll see that begin to be repaired.
It's gonna take some time, but yes.
Yeah.
What is that book, like the Nutcracker cases? I'm trying to.
Yes. Wait, I think I have it right. Oh my gosh, look. The Nutshell Studies of Unexplained Death.
Yes, I've read that.
You know it.
Yes, I do know it.
It's amazing.
It's great. I took a fairy tale class with Kate Bernheimer, and she was really into that book.
Oh, cool. There's another book of poems about it that's like all ekphrastic poems.
Oh, okay. Is it by her also?
I think I have it right here too. And now, Carol Guess. Yeah, Doll Studies, Forensics.
Oh, I haven't read that.
I have all my like forensic things right here, thank God.
Well, you have to have them right at your desk, right?
Yeah, I've got all these. I've got all these books from the library. There's this one. It's just pleasant reading, really.
Oh, yeah.
I got like forensic biology. Oh my God, I just created a book, Avalanche. Anyway, it's been interesting that the poems are different. I've got like a 29-page like sequence that's in there. I don't know.
Excellent.
I don't know what it is.
That sounds great.
I hope it's okay.
All right. Well, good luck on finishing up that manuscript. And
thank you, Matthew.
Be well.
You too. It's great to see you.
You too.